of the Baltic Sea states, where I am the coordinator of the Promise Barnahus Network. And I'm very pleased to join you today as the moderator of this webinar, which is hosted by the Child Protection Hub. And my role is to raise your questions to today's presenters, which you can write in the chat. And I will especially raise questions that are specifically about the Lighthouse and their work, but you'll also find me and other colleagues in the chat who are happy to answer your questions more generally about Barnahus and similar setups. It was just 4 short years ago when we first met representatives from the United Kingdom at the very first networking and working meeting of a project called Promise. At that time, the UK was a pilot country in our project, and it was a project that aimed at enabling Europe to establish a one-stop shop approach as the standard approach to supporting child victims of violence, an approach we call Barnahus. The role of the UK and their pilot country peers at the time was to provide concrete input to a number of standard-setting documents and to engage in our networking activities, spreading knowledge and practice not only from countries who already had what is known as Barnahus, but also among countries who were still working towards establishing their own services. And our colleagues from across Europe did this with such enthusiasm and generosity that we now have a formal network of similarly passionate professionals and services, all of whom have contributed to and or are working towards meeting what is known as the Barnahus quality standards. And I'll put a link in the chat for more information about those. It didn't take long for our pilot countries to start becoming model countries, and the UK is certainly no exception here. We've been watching with great interest as they hit the ground running. And with that, I am very happy to introduce Emma Harwood, the director of the Lighthouse, and her brilliant team. We are very much looking forward to learning all about how you work. You should unmute yourself, Emma.
Okay, great. Okay, good. I think we're there. So there we go. So we've come to from the Lighthouse today to talk to you, and I've got a really large team of colleagues with me. So we've set ourselves a bit of a time scale, but you can see there we have colleagues from across social care, psychology, therapeutic services, from the NSPCC, police and advocacy and health. So a real mixed service for you. And first of all, I just wanted to start, I guess, by talking a little bit about the Child House model or the Barnahus model, and sort of what it is that we've learned as we've been setting up the Lighthouse, before my colleagues will give you a bit more detail. I think one thing that we really just want to thank you for is we've learned so much from all the international best practice and the work of the Promise Project. And that's really helped shape the service that we provide in the Lighthouse in London. And you can see there that it's a mixture of many different agencies, as you'd be familiar with as Barnahus services. But we hope today that we'll be able to tell you about some of the things that we think make it quite a unique service in London, and share, I guess, some of our learning over the last 18 months. So this just gives you a bit of a pictorial representation of the team. Who it is that is part of that team, and you'll see there, sorry, I'm just losing the, can't quite see where I am. Okay. Hang on 1 second. Can you still see what I'm sharing?
Yes, we could see it.
I'm just going to go back. It totally lost it there for a minute, so I'm just going to go back and share that again. Here we go. Okay, that's better. So this is the team and the people that you'll meet, and you'll see that we organise ourselves into advocacy services, medical and therapeutic services. And some statistics just to share with you a little bit about what it is that we have been doing over the last 18 months or so. You'll see that, as for many services, mostly girls rather than boys attend the Lighthouse. And for us, more younger children, so 5 to 12-year-olds and 13 to 15-year-olds, rather than some of the adolescents that you might see in other services. Most coming from children's social care, and quite a large proportion experiencing sexual abuse within the family setting and the family home. One of the other things I think that's quite useful to know is that we have a real menu of services at the Lighthouse, and we've actually found that most children and parents tend to access all the services on offer, whereas we felt that when they came they might just access small parts of that. So there's something really unique, I think, about everything being under one roof. And the service that we try to offer is a service that is something that is really child-centred, something that's delivered at their pace, and allowing them really choice and control. I just want to show you a short film that we've made at the Lighthouse, and hopefully this will give you a bit of a flavour of what the building's like and the type of service that we provide.
Everyone deserves to feel safe and respected. When sexual abuse happens, everything can seem dark and confusing. It can be really hard to talk about, even though it's not your fault. The Lighthouse is a safe place where you can talk about things that have happened to you. Make sense of them. People here are here for you, to help you feel better and figure out the way forward. There's no rush. There's no pressure. Whenever you're ready, we're ready.
Okay, so hopefully that just gives you a bit of a sense of the type of services that we offer at the Lighthouse. I'll just explain to you now a brief journey for a child and some of the services that they experience, and then you'll be able to hear more about that from my colleagues on the webinar. So the first thing that happens when children come to the Lighthouse and when they're referred into us is our social care liaison colleagues gather a great deal of information about the children from the referrer, from the professional network, and make sure that we ensure the safety of the child by liaising with the local social care team. And through our intake process, we review and triage all of those referrals that come to us. Quite soon in the process, we like to encourage them to have their ABE interview, or you might know that as an investigative interview. And we want that to be at the right time for the child and somewhere which is the right place for them. And then they would come for a multi-agency holistic assessment, a chance to meet everyone in the Lighthouse team for their first assessment. The next part of that journey is the opportunity to access long-term therapeutic support or counselling. And that is for their whole family, not just the child, but also siblings, parents, foster carers, and that's can be really varied depending on the need of the child and the length of the time they need support. And then the last part of the journey will be advocacy support. Now that begins right at the point of when the child is referred to us, and you'll hear a lot more about that from my colleague Margaret a bit later. But the advocacy support is so important. It allows the child or young person to have a voice in the middle of really complex decisions in a criminal justice process. And they are that consistent person to help navigate the whole journey for the child and family. Finally, the other part of our team that you'll meet later on today is the police liaison officer. And the room you can see there on the screen at the moment is our interviewing suite at the Lighthouse. So finally, just to say, I'm going to hand over now to my team because I think it's really important that you hear from them rather than me. This is some of our broader team here on the photograph. You'll also see on the right-hand side there as myself holding some things that are a bit of a legacy of the COVID. And Deborah will talk a bit more about that when she comes to meet you. But yeah, just to whet your appetite there. Okay, so I'm going to keep sharing my screen, but I'll stop talking now, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague Martin to tell you more about the social care role.
Thank you, Emma. So I'm looking at it on my screen, but it's a little bit blurred on my screen, but I'm going to do my best to talk us through it. So hello everyone, my name is Martin and I'm a social worker. And at the Lighthouse, we have 2 social care liaison officers that are based there. It's myself and my colleague Emma, and we are there employed by the local government, and we work at the Lighthouse to represent children's social care within the Lighthouse. So children that come to our service will often have a social worker in the community, and we will work very closely with that social worker in the community, and we will make sure that the Lighthouse is following the child protection processes and procedures very closely. We're often the first point of contact for local social workers in the community. And in a short while, we're going to have a look at the referral pathway into the Lighthouse, or the child's journey, if you like. The way that the Lighthouse operates is that we don't take away from the normal child protection process that the local government follow with the police. We work alongside them. Myself and my colleague will often be that first point of contact. We'll often take consultations from children's social care. So if there is a disclosure of sexual abuse, the process is quite easy to follow. But if we also work with children where there is professional suspicion of sexual abuse, so part of our work is often helping local social work teams think about sexual abuse, and maybe offer some advice and guidance around how they might work towards a disclosure of sexual abuse. The area that we cover has a young people population, children and young people of 1.5 million. And at the Lighthouse, we expect to see around 500 referrals a year. So that kind of gives you a bit of context to the community that we're serving. A large part of our role was also around delivering training to professionals in the community, not just on the Lighthouse and the model that we follow, but also on sexual abuse and sexual exploitation. So we delivered training to social care teams, to education, and also to the police to really get sexual abuse and sexual exploitation at the forefront of people's thinking when they're working with children and young people and trauma. We operate within a London-wide child protection procedures, and I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly, but one of the most significant things about that is around sort of early engagement with the professional network, and for us to come on board very early on to make sure that we can start working with the child and the family, trying to plan the intervention. And another part of our work is around training newly qualified social workers. So we deliver training to newly qualified social workers around sexual abuse, particularly for social workers that aren't familiar with working with children that have been sexually abused, or they feel that they don't have the experience to work with children that have been sexually abused. So the next slide, this shows a referral pathway into the Lighthouse. And the one on the left-hand side is where the green shows you the process if a child discloses sexual abuse or there's suspicion of sexual abuse. And the following point is the strategy discussion. And I'll just touch on that. So that's the formal meeting that they have between social care and the police, where they plan the investigation and the child's journey, the the very first planning meeting, if you like. And we often join that meeting so that we can think about who is best placed to speak to the child, where should that child be spoken to, and whether there is any need for that child to see a doctor, and within what time frame that needs to be done. And that's the first point of contact into the Lighthouse. And on the right-hand side, in the purple, you'll see that children can self-refer to the Lighthouse. So they don't need to come through, be referred from a professional and come through that process. They can actually refer themselves and speak to one of the Lighthouse team themselves, and come into the service that way. And the strand on the left-hand side of that police investigation just shows you that the police investigation is always, you know, ongoing at the Lighthouse. We'll often have children that will come in and access the service at the very beginning, and the police investigation might go on for a long time, and we will work alongside that police investigation. And then at the very bottom, it shows you the intake meeting, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that shortly. So the intake process at the Lighthouse, we have an intake meeting, and you'll see there it's represented from psychiatry, paediatricians, psychologists, social care liaison, police liaison, and our NSPCC managers from the emotional health and wellbeing team and advocacy. We meet twice a week, and what we do is we review all the referrals that come to our service and requests for information. And really one of the things that the Lighthouse wanted to do was gathering the information as quickly as possible, so that we could find out what questions had already been asked by the child, what information had they already given, how was the police investigation going, and what was social care's view on the situation. We present all of that information to the multidisciplinary team, and together we think about the best way for the child to come into the service. And this slide here shows you at the top some of the discussions that we have in the Lighthouse intake meeting. So we discuss first and foremost the safety of the child, thinking around how we engage that child or young person. We offer consultation to the network, and with some cases we signpost them to other services if they don't meet our referral criteria. And I'm going to hand over now. So the next section talks about the initial assessment. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Hodes, who is going to discuss a bit more about that.
Deborah, are you unmuted? Let's see if I can find Deborah.
I've unmuted you, Deborah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting us. My name's Deborah Hodes. I'm consultant paediatrician at the Lighthouse. And we have a team of 3 consultant paediatricians. In the team, there's the consultant paediatricians, 2 nurses and a play specialist. And we all sometimes have trainee junior doctors who we train, and they come. At the first appointment, as Martin has just told you about, working towards the first appointment, the child and the non-abusing parent will come and meet the team. That's the doctor, the advocate, the emotional wellbeing practitioner, the play specialist, and the sexual health nurse. Not all of us at once will be actually seeing the child, but we will be there for them and very much might introduce ourselves at the beginning. What's really important is that the child is prepared with the photo book, which you'll see in the short film. We'll show you later, which you can then watch in alone and see it through, because it's about 10 minutes. So we'll only show you a little taste of it. But children, and I'm sure you know, children and young people have lots of myths about what's going to happen when they are referred, particularly to see a doctor, particularly for health assessment. It's very important to dispel those myths, show them what's going to happen, and assure them that they're not going to be embarrassed or hurt or undressed and horrible things done to them. But very much what they want, what they're worried about, will be attended to initially and at the first port of call. So when we do meet them, we think about their history, as all doctors will do, their vulnerabilities, disabilities, any other medical problems related to the abuse and not related to the abuse. We do a full examination with photo documentation of injuries, which might be old, current or new, and we do photo documentation of the genitalia and anus. We do still sometimes find signs, although as you know, it's only in 4% of those with historic sexual abuse. We diagnose and manage other medical conditions and identify other maltreatment. Investigations for sexually transmitted infections and their treatment is done, along with immunizations, offering immunizations, and above all, and importantly, contraception and education about safe sex and consent. And while we've been doing this during COVID, as Emma said, and I will show you our distancing, which has been quite a challenge. And so as you saw in the photograph, we do have these two lovely made meter distance, and the child will hold one, we will hold the other, and so we can make it fun to be at a distance. And that's what we try and do, to try and make health and all the other assessments fun. And really, what does the child want? What are they worried about? Are they worried about their physical health? Are they worried about their emotional health? Is the mother worried about the STIs, for example? Have they caught a sexually transmitted infection? So we answer all their questions, and we hope we give them relevant information about their physical and later on the emotional health. We write reports for social care and criminal and care proceedings. And we all provide a lot of consultations, either individually or with the rest of the team, as Martin mentioned, on cases by telephone and cases out in the community to advise on how to manage the child and how health in particular can be addressed. So now I think we'll just show you a few minutes of a film that was made here at the Lighthouse, which goes through the assessment and the medical assessment of a child who's been abused recently, very recently, and also previously some time ago.
Okay, thanks, Deborah. Let's have a go and see whether I can technically make this one work for you.
We'll just have a taste and then you can access the whole film.
I'm Dr. Ali, I'm one of the children's doctors. Do you want to...
A general history will be taken from the child and or the carer. This history and later examination may identify unmet health and emotional needs. The examination usually starts with some basic health checks.
Okay, Marcus, we're just going to check your weight and height, okay? So if you stand up there for me. Lovely. I'm just going to look in your ears, all right?
In most cases, it is not necessary for the child to remove all their clothes or wear a gown. If they prefer, they can take one piece of clothing off at a time and put it back on before the next is taken off. In acute cases, professionals may ask for some of the child's clothing for forensic evidence. A general examination is important. In acute sexual abuse cases, physical injuries might be present anywhere on the body, which may require medical attention and be supportive of a child's account.
Great. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a taste of the film, and you'll be able to follow that link to watch the rest of the film if you're interested, as Deborah said. Anything else you want to add, Deborah, before we move on?
No, I don't think so. I hope there'll be time for questions, and please feel free to ask me or email me, and then I can answer more fully.
Great. Okay, lovely. So I'm going to pass on to Vicky and Sherma now to tell us a bit more about the therapeutic approaches at the Lighthouse.
Shall I Sherma? I'm going to talk. If it's Emma, can you just move to the first slide, and then I'll move to the second, please. Okay, thank you. I'm Vicky Mattison. I'm one of the clinical psychologists leading the CAMS bit at the Lighthouse. Our overall emotional wellbeing lead, Rob Senior, is here on the call as well. I thought I'd just say a little bit about the child and adolescent bit of the team, because this is the bit that's funded by the NHS and is multidisciplinary. So we have Rob leading us, and we have nearly 5 clinical psychologists, 2 trainees and a CAMHS clinician and mental health nurse. And our offer includes, it's very varied, and I think I really wanted to just talk to this slide a bit because it's much more varied than we'd anticipated. So a lot of the work has been around thinking about the referrals when they come in and working closely with our colleagues in social care particularly to offer consultations to social workers, as Martin said, but also to schools and multidisciplinary teams, pre-assessment and when the work is ongoing, and sometimes that leads to training. Initial assessments, which is why I'm in the building this morning, I think it's been a big part of our work. And meeting often with one of the paediatricians and an advocate and thinking about what is the child or the young person or the family story and what would be most helpful at the moment. I've put here formulation-based practice. So as a CAMHS team, we're not model specific, but are very guided. It's quite a collaborative approach and very guided by what the child and the family bring. It's interesting because I don't think we'd anticipated that it feels like about half of the families we see, we have 2 clients in the room, the child who's presenting and their parent or parents. And often, and I'm sure you've had similar experiences, we have parents who are triggered by their own histories of sexual abuse as well. So it's about addressing that, thinking about it. Sometimes they're disclosing for the first time. We offer individual work, family work, and now group work, which has been a much more recent initiative. And we've drawn on some resources from the Washington Coalition for Sexual Assault, who've been running groups like this for a while. It's a course for parents. We had to work with the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, to be clear about what can safely be offered pre-trial with groups of parents who might be in criminal proceedings. So it's a psychoeducational course, but it's been a really exciting part of the work. And we've now, in the last 6 months, set up our first children's course. I've got 1 minute left, so I'm just going to move to the second slide, but just to say that the user participation bit has been a big part of what we do and meant that we've been guided by feedback from the parents themselves. This slide talks a little bit about what the parents have said from the course. We had a virtual ending session with parents yesterday, and they've talked about the course has ended, some of their work with the service has ended, but they want to remain connected. So we're in the middle of setting up a user forum for parents and young people, but most excitingly is we've been running this course with a survivor of sexual abuse herself, which in all the feedback has been really instrumental. Her role, and actually nothing to do with what we offer, but more with what they offer each other. And that's what I meant in the previous slide, by linking lives. So they're linking lives through the trauma they've experienced, but also the empowerment and the standing up to the abuse that they're bringing their families along. So that's enough from me. I'll hand over to Sherma.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sherma Charles. I'm a team manager working for the NSPCC, that's the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. By profession, I'm a social work manager, and I manage a team in the Lighthouse called Letting the Future In, often referred to as LTFI. LTFI is a model of work recommended within the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence guidelines. It's a therapeutic intervention for children and young people from the age of 4 years to 17 who have been sexually abused. It's a long-term intervention, which it roughly lasts for about 6 months, but that's only after a robust assessment of therapeutic need, which determines whether doing this model of work is appropriate at this time or appropriate altogether for this particular child or young person. My practitioners in LTFI are all social work trained, which is coming really handy given that we're working so close to Section 47. We're working at the beginning of a lot of the investigations that are going on with the local authority or children's services, social care, where the police investigation is ongoing, and sometimes, and quite often, we'll find during the course of our work, young people, children will make further disclosures, or during the course of the work, other safeguarding concerns come up. And this training history allows my team to be able to appropriately and in a timely way respond to such concerns. The team also offer training and consultation to external professionals, i.e. nurseries, schools involved in around the family, the network around the family, because obviously children don't just present or experience trauma at home or when they're with us in the Lighthouse. When they're at school, sometimes they will have behaviours that are indicative of them being traumatised, but sometimes the school find that quite
they find it quite nerve-wracking, I guess, because they don't quite understand it. So what we do is we offer them sessions around generalised indicators of trauma, but also how to kind of support it, how to contain it, whilst children who may be experiencing trauma in their school or in their classrooms. We move on to the next slide, please, Emma. We also have Protect and Respect from NSPCC. Protect and Respect is a specialist programme that works with children and young people around child sexual exploitation. It's a dual strand programme providing awareness raising, which comes in the form of one-to-one and group work, and is more based around preventative work or low-level CSE concerns. And then strand 2 is protection and support, which is for children and young people who are currently being exploited or have been and are moving towards the recovery stage of the work. And you'd often find for those moving towards a recovery stage that fit in kind of group 2, they've had quite an extensive involvement for quite a period of time. The work that P&R do is direct work with children and parents, but also they provide guidance and support to internal and external professional colleagues. A strong strand of the work that happens with P&R is around consultation. Child sexual exploitation is quite a big arena where there are quite, people know of it, but the depths and some of the intricacies of grooming and things like that, people are quite unaware of. So what you'll often find is our P&R practitioner will do a lot of consultation work with local authority, social workers and other community-based projects, offering them the opportunity to kind of reflect, think in a bit more detail and plan responses to CSD in the context of an ongoing and complex safeguarding piece of work that they are doing.
Great. Thank you so much, Emma and Vicky. That was really helpful to hear about that real range of different support services that we offer. So we're going to move on now to think a bit more about the criminal justice pathway. And I'm going to go first of all to Lisa Isaacson, our police liaison officer.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us all. There are 2 police liaison officers based at the Lighthouse. We're both detective constables with considerable experience investigating child sexual abuse and bringing these cases to trial. We actively encourage our colleagues on the front line who are now doing that work to refer their child victims to the Lighthouse so they can receive all the benefits from the service that you can see listed here. It takes approximately 2 years for a case to go to court, and long-term support from various practitioners, particularly Advocacy within the Lighthouse, helps them stay engaged with the process. And my colleague Margaret will speak more about that next. Moving on to the next slide, I'm going to focus on the psychologist interview pilot. Although this is only one part of our very varied role. The psychologists have been trained by an independent social work practitioner, which has been approved by the police. As police liaison officers, we have developed quality assurance processes for the psychologists to build on this training and for them to deliver effective interviews. As a police liaison officer, we provide detailed feedback from their interviews. For example, script of questions they've asked. We view the interview together and discuss what worked well and what can be improved. The police liaison officer will also create role plays and conduct them with the psychologist to hone their skills further. When we receive a referral form specifically for an interview, the police liaison officer will meet with the psychologist to create an interview plan in line with the UK's national guidelines of best practice. And then we will have a professionals meeting. And if we move on to the next slide, we can see the flow of the day. And one of the unique things about the Lighthouse is that we can spend the whole day planning and conducting the interview. So the professionals meeting is a collaborative process and it's unique, and we gather all the experts together in one room. So this would be the psychologist, the investigating officer, the social worker, and the police liaison officer. Given the length of time it takes to get to trial, police officers don't always have this experience. As the PLO, we bring our experience of defence questioning and our understanding of the level of scrutiny that comes to bear on the child's account. So time is spent in this meeting anticipating and covering issues in the criminal investigation to ensure all defences and points to prove evidentially are covered. If the child has additional learning needs, we might ask someone from school to join us, and they may have someone called a registered intermediary provided by the Ministry of Justice to assist with communication. Each child is considered as an individual, and as a team we discuss pace, breaks and the possibility of more than one session. We also consider the child's unique needs, and to give you a flavour of that, it's their cognitive ability, their communication style and skills, their confidence and developmental levels. As a team, we're sensitive to such factors, and it enables us to create a safe and non-judgmental interview environment for the child. And the psychologists have really helped us into how we frame questions. For example, evidentially, we would like to know why there's been a delay in reporting the abuse. But instead of asking that question bluntly, together we say, the psychologist will say, why is it safe to tell now? We also limit the amount of information that is shared with the psychologist to prevent bias in the interview and to avoid contaminating the interview process with too much knowledge. From the professional meeting, the psychologist has a clear objective for the pre-interview assessment, and to avoid any accusations of collusion or coaching, this is video recorded. The pre-interview assessment is an opportunity to practice with the child open questions in relation to a neutral topic. It serves to help the child experience the kind of detail that will be required from them in the evidential interview. And the psychologist will do their own ongoing assessment during it, and will bring back to the team afterwards. It's also an opportunity for them to build rapport with the child. In the video recorded interview, the psychologist combines their clinical training with their interviewing skills to obtain the child's account with the fine-grained detail needed. They have the skill to phrase the questions in a way that the child understands, and it means that multiple interviews are not needed. The psychologist will adapt the interview if the child displays any traumatic responses during it. For example, the child may disassociate. They may seem as if they've gone into a daydream, and the psychologist will reassure them that they're safe, and they would practice grounding techniques with them, keeping their feet on the floor, reminding them where they are and getting them to sit in their seat properly are some of the things that I've seen, as well as breathing techniques, and it's worked very well. The team, the officer in the case, the social worker and the police liaison officer are observing from a nearby room, and the psychologist may come out for a break to check that everything has been covered from an evidential perspective and whether anything else needs to be explored further. And if we move on to the next slide, we can see feedback from the child. And I think it's really important to remember that that this is a really difficult experience that the child goes through, and we're trying to make it as best as we can, but it's still difficult. And most importantly, we've got feedback from the Crown Prosecution Service about the psychologist leading the interview, and I think it speaks for itself about how they've received it. And I'd like to hand over to Margaret now, who will speak about advocacy.
Thanks, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Margaret Galloway, and I'm the Advocacy Team Manager here at the Lighthouse. So I manage a team of 7 advocates, and the advocates are really fundamental in their role at the Lighthouse. So we engage with children and young people at different stages along their journey in the Lighthouse, but namely when they're first referred into us, an advocate will make contact with the child and young person and the family and explain the Lighthouse, explain the service, but also talk about the different services that are on offer at the Lighthouse. And this will include also speaking about and explaining processes such as the initial assessment that was discussed earlier by my colleagues. So explaining what this process looks like, who will be part of that assessment and who they will be meeting when they come to the Lighthouse. They would also engage with the young people and ascertain their wishes and feelings. We work with children at their pace, so as and when they're ready, and we really make sure that professionals working alongside them are very aware to take it at their pace, so we're very much child-led. We support in different ways, as you can see on the slide. So we listen to the children, we ascertain their wishes and feelings, we empower them to be involved in decision-making and planning, so that it means that things aren't being done to them, but are happening with them, with their input. And we really promote their voices, whether that be within their family networks or with professionals working with the child or the young person. And as I said earlier, we are child focused and child led, so we do what is important for the child and young person. We also work with different organisations and professionals in the child's life. Emma, if you can go on to the next slide, please. So that is different organisations and professionals such as schools, so it could be liaising with school and the school teacher, thinking about if a child is out of school and they're due to be restarting and going back to school, thinking with the teachers around what support looks like for that child and young person, and really making sure that that child is part of that conversation and discussion and really reviewing it. So it's not just one conversation then we leave it, it's very much an ongoing process of having different conversations to make sure that actually the child is very involved and that the support is tailored to them as an individual. It's also making referrals to other organisations that could support with that child or their family, so such as other organisations that could support with domestic violence or kind of local sexual and health teams. We don't work in isolation, so we work with our other colleagues within the Lighthouse, and also joint work with organisations outside of the Lighthouse. So for example, joint work with local mental health services. Feedback from the children and young people that we work with is really vital as well. We really want to listen and to make sure that we're constantly hearing what they're saying and improving our services. So now we're going to hear an audio of young people who have accessed our services at the Lighthouse and are part of the Child and Young Person Forum here at the Lighthouse, and have shared the advice that they would give to others coming to the service.
Great, thanks Maggie. Now I'm going to try and play this for you, but if you can't hear the sound, if someone could just put it in the chat for me so that I know.
Going to other services, I felt judged. The person said they didn't believe what I was saying and made me feel bad. The Lighthouse doesn't do things like that. They are very welcoming, always there to listen and never judgmental.
They don't go on and on about your experience. It's not all about what you have been through. It's more than just talk.
The rooms feel safe at the Lighthouse.
I was worried before I came, but you don't need to feel so anxious about coming here.
Every session can be difficult. Maybe ask your parents for help.
Great. So we thought we would just end the session today just by, I guess, trying to put out for you what we think are some of the unique features of the Lighthouse. And I think really what those are advocacy, which you've just heard really well explained by Margaret there. I think the fact that we offer and have so integrated into the team, paediatricians, but also sexual health support. Children don't need to go elsewhere for that. The fact that we offer long-term therapeutic support for as long as the children and families may need. It's not just the early help. We've got these two really unique roles that you heard about today, the social care liaison role and the police liaison role. And just seen an example there, I guess, of the last thing which we think is really important to us, which is really active user engagement.
Thank you so much, Emma and team. A very impressive and thorough presentation of your service today. Emma, while you were talking about the unique value adds about your service earlier, you mentioned about that the uniqueness of being under one roof and that families tend to take advantage of more or all of the services. Can you maybe say something about the impact that that has had for the families and for the children in their experiences versus the spoken wheel approach?
Yeah, I think one of the things that it's really enabled children and young people to do is access parts of the service when they're ready. So often what happened historically is children may have had a medical but said they didn't want any counselling or support, or may have said or may have not mentioned things to do with their sexual health. The beauty of this model is that as the process goes on, if they come to see the advocate and they're talking about relationships and they get onto the topic of safe sex, the advocate can say to the young person, well, come upstairs and meet Julie, our sexual health nurse. Or someone who hasn't wanted a report to the police and then after a while actually decides, you know what, I don't want what happened to me to happen to someone else. They can meet Lisa or John, our police liaison officers, who can tell them a bit about the police journey. And so the thing we found has been really helpful is it's allowed children to mix and match through the services. It's never a linear pathway. But my experience previously of services is that they tended to work in quite a linear way, one refer to another. And if you missed the chance, then that was it, missed forever. But anyone want to add anything, like any case examples?
Victoria, you also have a question in the chat here about more what is involved in the parent psychoeducation course.
Somebody asked if they wanted to know a bit more about the course, is that right?
Yes, in the chat here, yes.
Okay, so we're about to start our third course for parents of children affected by sexual violence. This current course that we've just recruited to, it's all intrafamilial sexual abuse. The last two courses, they've been the mixture of peer-on-peer, intrafamilial, and some child sexual exploitation, but predominantly intrafamilial. And really, it's following processes for families who are really dealing with the impact of trauma, the trauma of themselves, for families, for siblings, for parents, and the wider community. And a lot of it has been psychoeducation and grounding for parents and containing, in order for them to contain their children, but a lot of information giving about what they might expect. I think a lot of the perspective has been that we're not thinking about what's the matter with their children, but what's happened to their children, and helping children to understand that trauma creates psychological struggles that if they have the opportunity to think with their parents about initially, or with someone in their family, that is the best possible predictor of good outcomes. So we've invested a lot in parents. Of course, therapy is really important, but it felt like a significant thing. It was a pilot, the first group. We did the first group just a year ago, and then we did a focus group with parents, and their response was so positive. I often say to Rob in my own supervision, I've been running parenting courses now for the last 20 years in child and adolescent mental health services. I've never had a full turnout for a parent course. Both groups, we had one dropout because someone left London, but both groups have been at full capacity from the beginning to the end. So that's quite exciting.
Wow, that's incredible. Congratulations.
Well, they've been great. We've learned an awful lot from them, and they've learned much more from each other than they have from anything we've given in the group. So it's been a really empowering, invaluable experience. And I think the real beauty of it has been what we've learned from our expert by experience, Candice, who is a writer of her own experience as a child of sexual abuse in her family. She came over and taught at a conference, and we cornered her. And now we've recruited her to our service, and she's paid for half a day a week to run the course with us. And she's extraordinary. And one of the parents said yesterday, what a role model you are for our daughter. I wish she could meet you. And it really has felt brilliant, very involved. I'd recommend that to anybody who's setting up services.
Lisa, I think there was a question about coaching. Do you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to do
Brilliant.
so.
Lisa, you've noticed a question about coaching.
Yeah. So the pre-interview assessment is recorded and a copy is given to the investigating officer. In our national guidelines, there is guidance about doing an assessment and encouraging it, which is helpful. And the recording will be given to the Crown Prosecution Service and could be given to the defence as unused material if there's anything contentious. And the reason why we plan so carefully is to avoid any accusations of coaching, but it is seen as beneficial, especially with little children. So for example, we had a little child who was asked, is your house blue, pink or something else? And she said yes. So that means the psychologist and us as a team decided that we can't give her multiple choice questions because it's beyond her cognitive ability. So it's very, very helpful for that. And then that also helps moving forward to trial about what that little one will need at trial in court to help her answer questions.
I also have another question for you. It's my own question, because it was, well, first of all, my internet seems to be unstable. Why, of all days? It was very interesting to hear about the detailed work that you do in your multidisciplinary meetings to make sure that you're covering all those evidentiary bases in the questioning. And I noticed you had a very interesting bullet point on one of your slides, early guilty pleas in a number of Lighthouse cases. I'd really like to hear more about that.
So I think we've had, because the interviews are good and they're detailed, we've had early guilty pleas, but also sometimes I think the suspects, they don't anticipate that a child is going to stay with the criminal justice process. They think that the child will drop out or they will be considered not to be telling the truth and not believed. And I think the good interviews with all the fine-grained detail combined with the support from our child and adolescent mental health service and advocacy and letting the future in or protect and respect, all of them come together to support the child through that process and to stay committed to it. And I think sometimes when suspects see that they have been believed by a number of professionals and it's not going to disappear, they're not going to drop out, and the trial is a hard thing, whoever you are in it, then that encourages as well the early guilty plea.
Brilliant, thank you. And then, and then Deborah, I have a question for you. While your service and many other services throughout Europe are already really well integrated with medical services, there are quite many, perhaps equally as many, that are on a progressive pathway to enable or welcoming or ensuring the presence of the medical services in their Barnahus or similar setup. And you are unmuted. And I'd like to know what you would say to a stakeholder or decision maker who maybe is still not sure in the value of every child who comes to the service getting a medical evaluation.
Yes, thank you. I think that's a very interesting question. And I think, and my experience is, a lot of people think it's not good to see the doctor, it's going to be traumatic, it's not necessary. But we found working in the team that it is very, very helpful. And I would say every single person is offered to meet the pediatrician. We don't call it a medical examination. We say meet the health team and to think about what aspects of health they're worried about. And for the most part, I would say the vast majority do talk and see us, and they usually have some sort of worries. Today I had someone who was fine, but in fact it turns out the child was wetting the bed as a response to the trauma of being sexually abused. So it doesn't seem superficially and immediately that the pediatrician is needed, but we found that is the case. The other aspect is the relationship between the physical and emotional health. And you know, and many people know, that children will present with physical symptoms because of their emotional difficulties, and vice versa. And so it's very important to address that. A third aspect, and I'm sure there are many more, but obviously time is limited, is the actual physical trauma. When children are hurt, they like a doctor to look and check them. And my narrative is always, actually, if they've been hurt in their private parts, in their back passage, in their anus, they can't look, and nobody else can. And it's one of the doctor's roles and duty to check that they've healed, they're normal, and if they were hurt, and if it did hurt them, that they've healed and it's not going to affect them from the long term. Questions are really fascinating. One 8-year-old asked us if she was pregnant. So we have to really incorporate as much as we can into supporting the children.
Brilliant, thank you so much. For anyone else listening, we have just a moment left. You might be able to get your questions squeezed in if you get it in the chat right now. But Emma, do you have some final words for us?
Well, I'm just thinking, first of all, just to apologise for my technical failing at the beginning. I think I finally got that sussed. So if there were any of the films that you couldn't see, or any of the slides that were really blurry at the beginning, I think Sean has been sharing those in the chat, and obviously we can share the slides with you afterwards. So yes, you think you know how to use Zoom and then it lets you down. But the person I wanted to bring in is Rob Senior, who some of you can hopefully see. He's got his camera on. Rob is our other clinical lead, so we have a joint clinical lead at the Lighthouse, Deborah for physical health, and Rob, who's a psychiatrist for our emotional health and wellbeing. So just, Rob, is there anything in this last minute or two that you wanted to add that the team hasn't covered? Do we need to unmute you? Hang on.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm unmuted. I think I've unmuted myself. Okay. No, I think there's nothing I want to add, except I suppose some of you may be wondering a little bit, well, why is there a psychiatrist? Oh my God, you see all these doctors have their phones ringing. I think at one point I didn't quite think that was something we would ever need, and I'm a bit of an odd child psychiatrist. I spent my life in multi-agency kind of high-risk services and around child protection and all of that stuff. But just one thing to just let colleagues know about our experience is that the level of risk, of mental health risk in our young people has been much higher than we imagined. So actually, strangely for me, my kind of, if I've got expertise, some of it would be as a child psychiatrist, has been about kind of self-harm, suicidality, and thinking about that pathway to the more kind of heavy end of child and adolescent mental health, and helping to kind of support young people who need to that kind of pathway, either from the more intensive outreach services out there in the community, or even sometimes to inpatient services. So don't underestimate, if you're setting up services, some of that risk. It's not the majority, and kind of psychiatric diagnoses are not the issue for many, many of the young people. But just once in a while, more often than we thought, that is the issue. So I just wanted to kind of add that a little bit. Some of this is about risk. And then just to underline, I think the physical health, to the reparative possibility of having your body attended to and looked after at the beginning of the journey can be really, really valuable. These are not young people who initially necessarily want to talk psychotherapeutically about what's happened to them, but I think sometimes they just want, their bodies taken care of. They want taken care of generally if they've been traumatized and looked after, and looking after their bodies, whatever their age, can be just so valuable.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We have the final question, and then we'll close. Emma, the question is about your funding.
Yeah, good question. So the project came together really by building on some early work we'd done to create smaller child sexual abuse hubs, which didn't cost a great deal of money, and we managed to get little pockets of resource together. And that really whetted people's appetite to pull together some more significant funding for the Lighthouse. Most of the funding came from an innovation fund from the Home Office, so from our government, topped up from the police in London and the NHS in London, and then also the Department for Education. So really 4 different elements came together, 4 government, either national or London-based government agencies came together to fund it, which was really great. They funded it for 2 years. We've just had our funding extended for a 3rd year, funded this time more locally in London by the police and the NHS. We're not quite sure what the future holds after September 21, but fingers crossed, London will continue to see the value of the service and fund it. We had a tiny bit of a bit of a buffer from a charitable funding. So through our relationship with the NSPCC, we had some funding from a charitable donor as well. The beauty of that is it's allowed us to do some of the bits around the edges that weren't anticipated in the original bid. So some of the work with siblings, some of the work with parents, and just some of the extra parts that we didn't think we'd be able to do. And it helped us to create our website and lots of communication material. So there's huge value, I think, longer term in keeping that relationship with some charitable funding as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Emma, and everybody else on the call today. And also, of course, to Child Protection Hub for hosting this very valuable webinar about your work. And you can see in the chat, many have found it incredibly full and inspiring. I wish you all a wonderful rest of your afternoon. And Vesna, do you have anything to say before we close?
Yes, thank you very much, Shona. I just want to thank all of you for give your time, for share your great work and experience. And just a final note that if participants want to receive a confirmation of attendance of this webinar, you can write an email info@chalhub.org. I will write it. And you can send an email to us, and then you will receive the confirmation on your email. So thank you very much again, and I wish you the best and the good day and the week after, of course. Goodbye.
Ciao.
Vesna, just before we go, what's the best way to share the presentation? It's quite a big document. Is it better if I try and send it to you, or what would
you
work?
can send it to me. I will prepare it in the PDF format and then upload it to ChalHub. You can, if you can't send, if you have a problem in sending it through the mail, you can upload it to WeTransfer. Then after I will download it. Okay. Yeah. Great. Yeah. Then I will put the recording and your presentation in PDF in the ChalHub webinar page that we prepared. Okay. Thank you.
All right,
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.